Thank you and good morning, Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Finance. Last month, there were 2 legislative reports on the state of Ontario's finances. They were described as blistering and scathing, and those descriptions, Speaker, are well-deserved. Both of the legislature—
Stop the clock, please. The member from Beaches East York come to order. And as I indicated to both sides, I'm not going to tolerate the interjections. And you'll see how quickly I'll deal with them if I have to. Continue, please.
Both of the legislature's independent officers openly challenged the ministry's credibility. The Financial Accountability Office said that the minister is using, quote, unlikely assumptions, quote, to make his debt claims. In fact, they said that if any of these wild assumptions fall short, the government's targets would not be achieved. They particularly took issue with the government's overly optimistic growth projections. So, Speaker, if the FAO doesn't believe the minister's numbers, why should the people of Ontario?
They don't.
Thank you. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, economists independent of government across Canada have cited this. Ontario is leading the way in economic growth in our country. The Conference Board of Canada has cited that we've outperformed and have the most transparent levels of reporting than any other government in Canada. Mr. Speaker, this member opposite continuously degrades and talks down the outstanding achievements of Ontarians and businesses in our province that are creating wealth, creating greater prosperity, hiring more jobs. We have the lowest unemployment of any part of this country, and we are overachieving every single year that we put forward our budgets to the benefit of Ontarians. We've reduced the deficit to under $900 million, Mr. Speaker, just last year. And we're going forward. We're balancing the budget this year, next year, and the year after that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Back to the minister. The FAO's comments were strong enough, but, Speaker, the Auditor General painted an even more damning picture of the minister's financial reporting. For the second year in a row, the auditor wouldn't sign off on the province's books without a big asterisk. But the auditor went further, stating flat out that the statements are, quote, significantly misstated, quote. She says our deficit last year was $1.4 billion higher than claimed, and our debt is a whopping $12.4 billion higher. She warned us and the markets and investors that we need to be able to rely on government's figures being accurate, but this year they cannot do so. That's her quote. You cannot rely on their numbers, is her quote. Speaker, again we ask, and I know they're belittling the auditor, I can hear their comments again, but we ask, if the AG and the FAO don't believe the minister's numbers, why should we?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, investors around the world believe our numbers. The people of Ontario and throughout Canada who buy our bonds believe our numbers. We have the highest liquidity of trade in bonds of any government across this continent, in fact. And, Mr. Speaker, our debt to GDP has been reduced, and it continues to reduce below 37%, again, overachieving our targets. Our accumulated deficits, which is a representation of the historical activity of Ontario's budgets, today, Mr. Speaker, it's at around 27%, the same as it was 25 years ago, Mr. Speaker. Our interest on debt as a percentage of revenue today is 8%. When he was in power, when the Progressive Conservatives were in power, Mr. Speaker, it was 15% of our revenues. We are overachieving, and we continually do so. We are using the same standards as we've always done, including what the Auditor General has done, even as recently as 3 years ago. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Thank you. Back to the minister. So if the minister is comfortable using, quote, significant misstatements and, quote, unlikely assumptions, then it should be no surprise to hear what else he continues to claim. They continue to say, quote, we're leading the G7 in economic growth. But Ontario is not number one, Speaker. There are 27 U.S. states ahead of us. And the minister continues to claim that manufacturing exports are up. But StatsCan just last week reported that Ontario manufacturing sales suffered their largest decline in 8 years. Here are some of the recent headings. Trade deteriorates. Exports languish. Ontario residents hit hard by manufacturing downturn. International merchandise exports fell. Manufacturing sales slip. Speaker, given all these examples, plus the Financial Accountability Officer and the Auditor General's criticism, how can anyone trust anything this government says?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, facts do matter, and that's out of...
Well, we're there. From now on, we're going into the warnings of those interjections, and the member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, come to order. You brought us to this point. Warnings are on. Finish.
Mr. Speaker, facts matter. This member opposite is citing sources.
The member from Leeds Grenville is warned. Carry on.
Citing references from years past, recognizing that as of today, Ontario is ahead of the curve. Our unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in 16 years at 5.7%. And, Mr. Speaker, that's not to say that we're not continuously looking at stimulating economic growth around all of Ontario, recognizing some regional disparities exist. That member opposite and that party voted against those measures that improve prosperity, stimulate growth, and continuously balance the book.
Thank you. New question.